A puddle of muddy water exploded across the sidewalk, drenching an elderly man from head to toe. From inside the sleek black sports car, a young man in designer sunglasses laughed and shouted, "Watch where you're standing, old-timer!" The car roared away, bass thumping from its speakers, leaving behind a 73-year-old man standing motionless in soaked clothes, brown water dripping from his worn military cap. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply wiped the mud from his eyes, looked down at his ruined jacket, and continued walking in the same direction he'd been heading. What that young driver didn't know was that in exactly 45 minutes, he would come face to face with that same old man, and what he would witness would haunt him for the rest of his life. If you believe that respect should be earned through actions, not appearances, type honour in the comments below. Harold Mitchell had been walking the same route every Saturday morning for the past 12 years. Ever since his wife Margaret passed away, the shooting range had become his sanctuary, his church, his place of peace. At 73 years old, Harold didn't look like much to the casual observer. His shoulders, once broad and powerful, had curved slightly with age. His hands, steady as surgical instruments in his prime, now showed the slight tremor that comes with 7 decades of life. He wore simple clothes, practical things from the discount store 3 blocks from his small apartment. His jacket was 15 years old. His boots had been resoled twice. The only item he owned that held any real monetary value was the precision rifle case he carried, and even that was scratched and worn from decades of use. To anyone passing by, Harold Mitchell looked like exactly what he appeared to be. A quiet, unremarkable old man making his way through a world that had largely forgotten him. But appearances, as they say, can be deceiving. Harold had grown accustomed to being invisible. In a society that worshipped youth and flash and noise, a 73-year-old man in worn clothes might as well have been a ghost. People looked through him. Clerks at the grocery store spoke to him slowly, as if age had affected his intelligence. Young people on the sidewalk expected him to move aside for them. He had learned to accept this, not because he believed he deserved disrespect, but because he had seen enough of life to know that some battles weren't worth fighting. He had fought the battles that mattered. He had fought them in jungles so dense the sunlight never touched the ground. He had fought them on mountainsides where the air was so thin his lungs burned with every breath. He had fought them in deserts where the sand got into everything, including your soul. Those battles had earned him the right to walk in peace, to choose his conflicts, to let small insults roll off him like water off stone. The splash had been an insult. Harold knew that. Harold knew. The young man in the sports car hadn't hit that puddle by accident. He'd seen Harold walking, he'd seen the massive puddle at the curb, and he'd deliberately accelerated to maximize the spray. Harold had seen the grin on the young man's face, heard the laughter, caught the mocking words thrown from the window. In another life, in another time, Harold might have responded differently. But Harold was 73 years old now. He had learned that anger was a fire that burned the person carrying it far more than the person it was aimed at. So he wiped the mud from his face, adjusted his rifle case on his shoulder, and kept walking. His Saturday appointment wouldn't wait, and neither would his peace of mind. The Veterans Memorial Shooting Range sat at the edge of town, a sprawling facility that had been built 15 years ago by a group of local businessmen who wanted to give something back to those who had served. It wasn't fancy, but it was well maintained and respected. The membership was diverse: active duty military personnel, retired veterans, law enforcement officers, competitive shooters, and ordinary citizens who simply wanted to exercise their Second Amendment rights in a safe and structured environment. Harold had been a founding member. His name was on a small plaque near the entrance, though he'd asked them not to make a big deal of it. He came here for solitude, not recognition. The rangemaster, a retired Marine Corps gunnery sergeant named Frank Delgado, always had Harold's favourite lane reserved for him. Lane 17, at the far end of the rifle range, where the morning sun came through the skylights at just the right angle and the ambient noise from other shooters was minimal. Harold arrived at the range still damp, his clothes stained with muddy water, his boots squelching slightly with each step. Frank looked up from the check-in desk and immediately noticed Harold's condition. "Jesus, Harold, what happened to you? You look like you went swimming in a ditch." Harold managed a small smile. "Some young fella in a sports car thought I needed a bath." Frank's expression darkened. "You get his plate number? I know some guys who could—" Harold held up a hand. "It's not worth the trouble, Frank. Just a kid being a kid. I've had worse things thrown at me than dirty water." Frank shook his head but didn't push further. He'd known Harold Mitchell for 15 years, and he knew there was no point arguing with the man once his mind was made up. "Lane 17 is all yours, as always. The new guy brought in some interesting targets today if you want to try something different." Harold nodded his thanks and made his way toward the rifle range, his worn boots leaving damp footprints on the polished concrete floor. In the parking lot outside, a sleek black sports car pulled into a space near the entrance. The engine rumbled aggressively before shutting off, and the driver's door swung open to reveal the same young man who had splashed Harold 40 minutes earlier. His name was Tyler Brennan, and he was 24 years old, the son of a successful real estate developer who had given his only child everything he'd ever wanted, and very little of what he actually needed. Tyler had grown up believing that the world existed for his entertainment, that his father's money made him better than other people, that respect was something you took rather than something you earned. He had come to the shooting range today because his friends had been talking about guns, and Tyler couldn't stand not being the centre of attention in any conversation. He'd decided to get his certification so he could dominate those discussions, show everyone he was an expert, maybe buy something expensive and flashy to show off at parties. He had no respect for firearms, no understanding of their history or their weight, no appreciation for the discipline they required. To Tyler, a gun was just another toy, another status symbol, another way to prove that he was better than everyone else. Tyler swaggered through the front door with all the confidence of a young man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. He was wearing designer jeans that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a fitted polo shirt with a logo prominently displayed, and a gold watch that caught the fluorescent lights and threw reflections across the walls. He approached the check-in desk where Frank was still seated, and he didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'm here for the beginner certification course. Brennan. Tyler Brennan. My assistant should have called ahead." Frank's expression remained neutral, though years of military service had given him an excellent poker face. "Yes, Mr. Brennan, you're signed up for the basic firearms safety course. It starts in about 20 minutes. You'll be on the handgun range with instructor Williams. Do you have any prior experience with firearms?" Tyler waved his hand dismissively. "I've shot guns before, video games mostly, but I'm a quick learner. Probably won't need the full course, but my lawyers said I should do it officially." Frank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Video games. Right. Well, real firearms are a bit different. I'd recommend paying close attention to everything Instructor Williams tells you. Safety's not optional here." Tyler didn't respond. His attention had already wandered to the facility around him, taking in the trophy cases, the photographs on the walls, the various certificates and awards displayed near the entrance. His eyes passed over the small plaque with Harold's name without registering it. He was looking for something impressive, something worth talking about at the club later. His gaze swept toward the large windows that looked out over the rifle range, and that's when he saw him. The old man from the sidewalk, the one he'd splashed with his car, standing at the far end of the range, setting up at a shooting station, with the slow, methodical movements of someone who had done the same thing 1,000 times before. Tyler felt his stomach drop. His face, which moments ago had been arranged in an expression of casual arrogance, went pale. The old man hadn't seen him yet. Maybe, Tyler thought, maybe he wouldn't recognize him. Maybe old people all looked the same to him, and old people probably thought the same about young guys in nice cars. Maybe he could just do his course, stay on the handgun range and avoid the rifle area entirely. But Tyler couldn't look away. Something about the old man commanded his attention, demanded his observation. Harold had removed his wet jacket and hung it on a hook near his station. Beneath it, he wore a simple grey t-shirt that revealed arms still corded with lean muscle despite his age. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Opening the rifle case, inspecting the weapon, checking the chamber, loading the magazine, settling into position. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Every action flowed into the next with the precision of a master craftsman at his bench. Harold lifted the rifle, a custom precision model with a scope that probably cost more than Tyler's watch, and settled the stock against his shoulder. He took a breath, released half of it, and fired. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed through the range despite the hearing protection everyone wore. Tyler, standing behind the observation window, watched as the target 500 yards downrange registered a perfect center hit. He blinked. Surely that was luck. Nobody hit center on their first shot, especially not an old man who could barely walk straight. But Harold chambered another round, settled again, and fired. Another perfect hit so close to the first that the holes nearly overlapped. Then another. 5 shots, 5 perfect hits, each one landing within a circle no larger than a silver dollar. Tyler felt his mouth go dry. He had seen enough action movies to know what good shooting looked like, and this wasn't good. This was something else entirely. This was art. Frank had come to stand beside Tyler, watching the young man's reaction with quiet satisfaction. "Something wrong, Mr. Brennan? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tyler tore his eyes away from the observation window. "That old man, the one shooting, who is he?" Frank allowed himself a small smile. "That's Harold Mitchell. He comes in every Saturday morning, same time, same lane. Been doing it for 12 years. Tyler shook his head. "No, I mean, who is he? How can he shoot like that? That's not normal." Frank turned to face Tyler directly, his expression shifting to something more serious. "No, it's not normal. Nothing about Harold Mitchell is normal." He paused, gathering his words. Harold Mitchell served 3 tours in Vietnam as a sniper with the Army's Special Operations Group. He has 87 confirmed kills, which made him one of the most lethal snipers in the history of the conflict. He received the Silver Star twice, the Bronze Star 3 times, and a Purple Heart. He spent 11 months in a POW camp after his position was overrun and still managed to escape and make it back to friendly lines. After Vietnam, he served another 20 years, training the next generation of military snipers. Half the instructors at this facility were either trained by him directly or trained by someone he trained. Frank let that sink in before continuing. When Harold Mitchell shoots, he doesn't miss. He hasn't missed in 50 years. Every shot you just saw, he could make those shots in the dark in a hurricane hanging upside down from a helicopter. He's a legend, Mr. Brennan. A living, breathing legend. And from the look on your face, I'm guessing you two have already met. Tyler's face had gone from pale to ashen. His hands, which had been casually stuffed in his pockets, were now trembling slightly at his sides. The memory of the morning came flooding back. The puddle, the spray, the laughter, the mocking words thrown from his window. He had splashed a war hero. He had laughed at a man who had killed 87 enemy combatants, who had survived torture and imprisonment, who had served his country with distinction for over 3 decades. Tyler had splashed him with dirty water and called him old-timer and driven away laughing. The shame hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs and making his knees feel weak. "I didn't know," Tyler whispered. "I had no idea." Frank's expression offered no sympathy. "Would it have mattered if you did? Would you have treated him differently if you'd known he was a decorated veteran?" Tyler started to respond, then stopped. The honest answer, the one he couldn't bring himself to say out loud, was probably not. He would have been slightly more careful, maybe, but only because he would have feared getting caught, feared the consequences. He wouldn't have treated Harold with respect because Harold deserved respect. He would have treated him with caution because Harold was dangerous. And that realization, perhaps for the first time in Tyler's privileged life, forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth about himself. Out on the range, Harold had finished his warm-up routine and was now working through a series of more challenging shots. Moving targets, variable distances, awkward angles. Each shot was precise, each movement was controlled. There was a quiet dignity in his work, a craftsman's pride in demonstrating mastery over his chosen art. He didn't showboat, didn't celebrate his hits, didn't even seem particularly satisfied by them. He simply loaded, aimed, fired, and repeated, as natural as breathing. Tyler watched for several minutes, unable to look away. He noticed things he hadn't seen before. The faded scars on Harold's forearms, the economy of his movements, the way his eyes never left the target once he'd begun his aiming sequence. He noticed the worn rifle case with the American flag patch sewn onto one side. He noticed the simple wedding band still worn on Harold's left hand, a reminder of a wife who had waited for him through 3 tours and had spent 40 years at his side before cancer took her away. Tyler thought about his own life, his designer clothes, his sports car, his gold watch, his apartment paid for by his father, his complete and total lack of anything resembling accomplishment. He had never earned anything in his life. He had never sacrificed for anyone. He had never put himself in harm's way for a cause larger than himself. He was 24 years old and he had contributed absolutely nothing of value to the world. Meanwhile, this 73-year-old man in worn clothes and resoled boots had served his country, saved lives, endured torture, trained warriors, loved his wife, and walked the same quiet path every Saturday morning for 12 years, without complaint, without recognition, without demanding that anyone acknowledge his worth. And Tyler had splashed him with dirty water and laughed. The certification course began, but Tyler couldn't focus. Instructor Williams was patient and thorough, explaining firearm safety rules, demonstrating proper grip and stance, walking the class through the basics of marksmanship. But Tyler's mind kept drifting back to the rifle range, to the old man in the grey t-shirt, to the steady crack of precise shots landing exactly where they were intended. When the class took a break, Tyler found himself walking toward the observation window again, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Harold was still there, still shooting, still demonstrating the same supernatural accuracy he'd shown all morning. Tyler watched him finish a magazine, eject it, reload, and continue. There was no pause for rest, no break for water, no moment of hesitation, just the steady, relentless pursuit of perfection. "He does this every week," a voice said beside Tyler. He turned to find an older woman in shooting glasses and ear protection standing nearby. "Never misses a Saturday, rain or shine, even on holidays. He was here the morning after his wife passed, came in looking like a ghost, shot for 2 hours, and left without saying a word to anyone. Frank told me later that Harold said the shooting was the only thing that kept him sane that day. The focus, the discipline, the ritual of it." The woman shook her head with something like admiration. "I've been shooting competitively for 30 years. I've met Olympic champions, world record holders, the best of the best. Harold Mitchell is better than all of them. Not because he's more talented, but because he's more dedicated. 50 years of practice, 50 years of refining his craft. That's what mastery looks like, kid." Tyler didn't respond. He couldn't. The woman drifted away, but Tyler remained at the window, watching Harold shoot until his class resumed. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Tyler went through the motions of the certification course, learned how to safely handle a handgun, fired his qualifying shots with results that could charitably be described as adequate. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the splash, the laughter, the dismissive wave. He kept thinking about what Frank had told him, about the silver stars and bronze stars and Purple Heart, about the POW camp and the escape, about the 87 confirmed kills. He kept thinking about a young man in a sports car who had thought himself better than an old man on a sidewalk, and how spectacularly wrong that young man had been. When the course ended, Tyler didn't leave. He stood in the main facility watching through the window as Harold methodically packed up his equipment, cleaned his rifle, and returned it to its worn case. His movements were the same as they'd been all morning, deliberate, precise, unhurried. Harold put on his mud-stained jacket, shouldered his rifle case, and began walking toward the exit. This was the moment. Tyler knew it instinctively, the way you know when a door is about to close forever. If he didn't act now, if he let Harold walk out of this building without saying anything, he would carry this shame with him for the rest of his life. It would fester and rot inside him, a reminder of his own cowardice, his own unworthiness. He had to say something. He had to try. Tyler intercepted Harold near the exit, stepping into his path with none of his usual swagger or confidence. Up close, Harold looked even more weathered than he had from a distance. His face was lined with wrinkles earned through decades of sun and wind and hard living. His eyes, though, were sharp and clear, missing nothing. They focused on Tyler with the same steady attention they had given the targets on the range. Harold recognized him immediately. Tyler could see it in the slight shift of his expression, the microscopic tightening around his eyes. But Harold didn't say anything. He simply waited, patient as stone. "Sir," Tyler began, his voice cracking slightly on the word. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Sir, I need to apologize. This morning, on the street, that was me, in the car. I was the one who—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. Harold continued to wait, offering no help, no easy absolution. Tyler forced himself to continue. "I was the one who splashed you, and laughed about it, and drove away. He met Harold's eyes, forcing himself not to look away despite the shame burning in his chest. "I didn't know who you were, but that's not an excuse. It wouldn't have mattered if you were a veteran or a janitor or anyone else. What I did was wrong. It was disrespectful. It was cruel. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Harold studied the young man for a long moment. Tyler expected anger. He expected a lecture, a condemnation, perhaps even a threat. What he didn't expect was what actually happened. Harold's expression softened, not quite into a smile, but into something warmer, something closer to understanding. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "You know what the difference is between a boy and a man?" Tyler shook his head. "A boy does whatever he wants without thinking about the consequences. A man takes responsibility for his actions, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Harold shifted his rifle case on his shoulder. "What you did this morning was the action of a boy. What you're doing right now, standing here, looking me in the eye, admitting you were wrong, that's the action of a man." He reached out and placed one weathered hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Apology accepted, son." Tyler felt something release inside him, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. His eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall, at least not yet. "Thank you, sir. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Harold shook his head. "Forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what they need. I spent 3 tours learning that lesson. Some of the men I killed probably didn't deserve to die. Some of the men I couldn't save probably didn't deserve to live. In the end, deserve has got nothing to do with it. We do the best we can with what we've got. We try to leave the world a little better than we found it, and we forgive each other when we fall short." He gave Tyler's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You fell short this morning, but you're standing tall right now. That counts for something." They stood there for a moment longer, 2 men from different generations, different worlds, different definitions of success and failure. Then Harold nodded once and stepped past Tyler toward the exit. He paused at the door and looked back. "That certification course you took today, it's just the beginning. Firearms aren't toys, they're tools. Dangerous tools that demand respect." His eyes held Tyler's. "Come back next Saturday. I'll show you what that respect looks like. Maybe teach you a few things about shooting while I'm at it, if you're interested." Tyler nodded, unable to speak. Harold gave him one last look, something almost like approval in his weathered features, and walked out into the parking lot. Tyler watched him go, watched the old man in the mud-stained jacket walk past the sleek sports cars and expensive trucks, to the bus stop at the corner, watched him sit down on the bench with his rifle case beside him to wait for public transit. Tyler thought about offering him a ride. He thought about running out to the parking lot, pulling his car around, opening the passenger door and driving Harold wherever he needed to go, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the understanding that Harold didn't need his help, didn't want his pity, wouldn't appreciate being treated like a charity case. Harold Mitchell had walked this route every Saturday for 12 years. He would continue walking it until his legs gave out. That was his choice, his ritual, his peace. Tyler had no right to intrude on that. The following Saturday, Tyler returned to the range. He arrived early, dressed in simple clothes, and asked Frank to let him know when Harold showed up. Harold came in at exactly the same time as before, wearing the same worn jacket and resoled boots, carrying the same scratched rifle case. His eyes found Tyler immediately, and something that might have been surprise flickered across his features. "You came back," Harold said. It wasn't quite a question. Tyler nodded. "You said you'd teach me, if I was interested." Harold studied him for a moment, the same steady evaluation as before. Then he nodded once. "Lane 17, follow me." That was the beginning of something Tyler hadn't expected. A friendship, a mentorship, a relationship that would reshape the trajectory of his life. Over the following months, Harold taught Tyler everything he knew about marksmanship. But more than that, he taught Tyler about discipline, patience, humility, and respect. He taught him that every person carried a story worth hearing, that appearances were the least important thing about someone, that true strength was measured not by what you could take, but by what you could give. Tyler learned to shoot with something approaching competence. More importantly, he learned to see the world through different eyes. He stopped wearing designer clothes to the range. He started actually listening when people spoke, instead of waiting for his turn to talk. He began looking at older people not as obstacles to be dismissed, but as repositories of wisdom and experience. He started volunteering at the Veterans Centre, where Harold spent his Tuesday afternoons. He began to understand that respect was something you gave freely, not something you withheld until someone proved they deserved it. Harold Mitchell passed away on a quiet Sunday morning, 3 years after that first meeting at the range. He was 76 years old. He died in his sleep, peaceful and painless, surrounded by photographs of his wife Margaret and the American flag that had draped her coffin at her funeral. Tyler was one of the pallbearers. He delivered the eulogy at a service attended by hundreds of veterans, many of whom had travelled from across the country to pay their respects to a legend. Tyler spoke about the day they met, about the splash and the shame and the forgiveness. He spoke about what Harold had taught him, about how a 73-year-old man in worn clothes had shown a spoiled young man in a sports car what real strength looked like. He spoke about respect and dignity and the importance of seeing people as they truly were, not as they appeared to be. When the service ended and the flags had been folded and the rifles had fired their salute, Tyler drove to the shooting range one last time. He walked to lane 17, stood where Harold had stood 1,000 times before, and fired a single shot at a target 500 yards away. It wasn't a perfect hit. Not quite centre, but it was close. Close enough. Tyler set down the rifle and let the tears come at last. Tears for a man who had deserved so much more than a splash of dirty water on a Saturday morning. Tears for a world that so often failed to see the heroes walking among them. Tears for his own transformation from boy to man. That single shot echoed through the range, and somewhere in the stillness that followed, Tyler could almost hear Harold's quiet voice. "Not bad, son. Not bad at all. Every encounter we have is an opportunity to lift someone up or tear them down, an opportunity to show respect or display contempt, an opportunity to recognize the hidden worth in others or to dismiss them based on appearances." Harold Mitchell spent his life choosing the first option, even when it was difficult, even when others chose the second. He forgave a young man who had wronged him and turned that moment of shame into a lifetime of growth. If Harold Mitchell could forgive someone who had splashed him with dirty water and laughed about it, surely we can all find it in ourselves to treat strangers with a little more kindness, a little more patience, a little more respect. If this story moved you, subscribe to my channel for more stories about ordinary people with extraordinary hearts. And the next time you see an old man walking down the street, remember, you might be looking at a legend.